I spent the first couple weeks of my time as Secretary of State working to try to see if there wasn't a way to fix the deal. I spoke with my European counterparts. I traveled there in my 13th hour as Secretary of State. I was on the ground in Brussels speaking with my European counterparts. We couldn't get it done. We couldn't reach agreement there. The United States intends to work hard at the diplomatic piece of working alongside all of our partners. We focus on the Europeans, but there are scores of countries around the world who share our concerns and are equally threatened by the Iranian regime. It's that shared interest, it's the value set, which will ultimately drive, I believe, a global response to this, to the world's largest state sponsor of terror. I'm convinced it can take place. My team is going to work diligently to do that. We're going to do so in the context of trying to address the concerns of all of our partners. And I'm convinced that over a period of time, there will be a broad recognition that the strategy that President Trump has laid out is the right one, that will put Iran in a place where it will one day rejoin civilization in the way that we all hope that it will.
It's clear through your comments this morning that you truly want tough sanctions. And I think that there is some remaining concern about how are you going to deal with the nuclear concerns. Can you speak to that for just a bit? And let me say to our audience, by the way, that I wish we had more time with the Secretary this morning, and there will be an abrupt and a hard stop because we have to get him out to the CIA and for the swearing-in ceremony, and we don't want you late for that. So talk to us about...
Got to go back one more time.
One more time.
Look, the nuclear file is imperative. It presents the largest, most severe threat for sure. The JCPOA fell short. It was a delay. Our aim is to get that permanently fixed. I mentioned quickly, right, we ask our other Middle Eastern partners to do hard things. We put a 1, 2, 3 agreement in front of them and say, this is what you have to do. And they say, hey, the Iranians enrich. That seems to me a reasonable point. Well, our demands from Iran aren't unreasonable. Give up your program. End it. Should they choose to go back, should they begin to enrich, we're fully prepared to respond to that as well. I'm certainly not going to share with you today precisely what our response will be, but we watch them talk. We've heard them say, I hope that they'll make a different decision, that they'll choose a different path. We welcome them taking a path that other nations in their region are beginning to take as well.
Well, can you explain for us the sanction structure and how you intend to target the Iranian regime without hurting our European friends?
Well, anytime sanctions are put in place, countries have to give up economic activity. So the Americans have given up economic activity now for an awfully long time. And I'll concede, there are American companies who would love to do business with the Islamic Republic of Iran. There's a huge market there. It's a big, vibrant, wonderful peoples. But everyone's going to have to participate in this. Every country is going to have to understand that we cannot continue to create wealth for Qasem Soleimani. Right? That's what this is. At the end of the day, this money has flowed to him. The economics have permitted them to run roughshod across the Middle East. Our effort is to strangle his economic capacity to do harm to the Middle East and to the world. Nuclear programs aren't cheap. To the extent we are effective at making it more difficult on the Iranian regime, we will reduce their capacity to continue to build out their nuclear weapon system as well.
You've laid out a very, very bold plan this morning. Do you have a time frame for getting all this done?
So the sanctions are back in place and are winding down over the next 55 days. There's lots more work in place. It is a effort across all of government. We're working certainly diplomatically in the lead, but Department of Commerce, Department of Defense, each of us has the same mission from President Trump. I can't put a timeline on it, but at the end of the day, the Iranian people will decide the timeline. At the end of the day, the Iranian people will get to make a choice about their leadership. If they make the decision quickly, that would be wonderful. If they choose not to do so, we will stay hard at this until we achieve the outcomes that I set forward today.
Well, Mr. Secretary, again, on behalf of the Heritage Foundation and the scholars here who've been working on these issues for a very long time, we want to Thank you.
All right, so there you go. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo answering some questions in regards to the speech that he just delivered. The speech talking about the administration's plan moving forward now that the president has pulled the U.S. out of the Iran nuclear deal. He did that 2 weeks ago, citing a list of complaints that the deal essentially was failing, that it didn't address certain things. It didn't address Iran's destabilizing influence throughout the region, that there was a sunset clause in it which would allow Iran to ramp up their nuclear ambitions once a decade or so had passed, and other complaints. Well, let's bring in CBS News Justice Department reporter Kylie Atwood to talk a little bit about what we've heard from Mike Pompeo's speech. First off, to start things, Kylie, what were your sort of big takeaways? What did you hear that sort of piqued your interest?
Well, Anne-Marie, we heard Secretary Pompeo kind of lay out the broad strokes of what the Trump administration's Iran policy is going to look like now that they are out of the JCPOA. And so essentially, we heard Trump announce the exit, but we haven't really heard what it's going to look like now. And he was very forceful in his language, saying that Iran is now going to face the strongest sanctions in history. And that's going to come from the U.S. imposing those sanctions. They're also going to put DOD to work, the Pentagon to work, in terms of deterring what Iran is doing in the region. The U.S. is also going to support the Iranian people. And then at the end of the day, when all this comes together, Pompeo said that, yes, Trump is willing to negotiate a new Iran deal if Iran comes to the table. Basically, putting kind of the threat there out to Iran that you're going to face these sanctions, you're not going to be able to finance all of the destabilizing activity that you continue to do, the terrorist groups that you continue to finance in the region, and you're going to have to decide if you want to stop that or if you want to support the economy of Iran, which right now is doing very, very unwell. It's 25% youth unemployment, which Pompeo mentioned. But in order to get to this, proposed new Iran deal, there are a lot of things that Pompeo put on the table that Iran's going to have to do. So it's a tall objective, and it's going to take a long time, probably.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that a couple of times throughout the speech, he spoke directly to the Iranian people, essentially saying, these sanctions are going to hurt. And if you feel that pain, don't blame the U.S., blame your own government.
Right. And he mentioned a few times, why are Iranians not blaming their leadership, and why are they not really understanding that the two are inextricably linked? Your leadership and your economy are two things that are very, very tied to one another. I also think that one of the interesting things is that Pompeo didn't necessarily speak to Europeans and explain to them what the new U.S.-Iranian sanctions mean to European countries. And so there are European certain businesses that want to do business with Iran, and he didn't say to them directly, you are going to face U.S. sanctions, but he implied that they will, because he said everyone has to be on the same page here, and the sanctions are going to be tough, they're going to be biting, and that's what's going to bring Iran back to the table, sort of the same bet that, ironically, the Obama administration took before it came to this first JCPOA deal back in 2012.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting that one of the first questions he was asked was about how he was going to win over European allies, and he essentially said, well, through common values. I suppose one of those common values is businesses that want to turn a profit. Turning a profit is a common value. But you're right, he didn't specifically say, listen, if you're a country, a European country, and you want to do business with Iran, we're going to target you as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he also spoke to European countries sort of indirectly in saying, listen, of course we want Europeans to come on board with us and to impose these sanctions on Iran and to be tough on Iran. But there are also other countries that we can draw into the fold here. He named a few. He named South Korea, UAE, Qatar, Japan. And he said that those are countries that also want to see Iran's behavior reined in. And so basically saying that we don't just need Europeans, we have other allies worldwide who will work with us on this.
Right. Kylie Atwood, thank you so much.